I know I replied to your comment already, but I have a whole ass rant about this, so we're just gonna go with it. One of the things that I freaking hate is how much the idea of trigger warnings has been misused. One, I hate the term trigger warning. I prefer content note because, one, who are we to presume what is actually triggering to people? As somebody who is very, very much traumatized myself, who has CPTSD and who has OSDD, I can tell you I've experienced some shit. Many of the people around me have experienced some shit. And I will tell you that we do not have the same triggers. We don't. We are not triggered by the same things. And there's lots of things that I'm fine with that trigger other people, right? And trauma is tricksy in a lot of ways, in the sense that there's a lot of mundane things that nobody content notes that are very triggering to people who are survivors, because those things happen to be in the environment. Whether it is a scent, whether it is a sound, whether it is a certain t-shirt or a certain look or a certain appearance or a certain vibe or a certain environment, it doesn't matter. There are so many arbitrary things that are part of our lives that nobody would ever content note that absolutely are activating and triggering. And so when I see people weaponize this trigger warning thing, it drives me up the fucking wall. Because this idea of like, you didn't trigger warn, so you should trigger warn that. Trigger warning, trigger warning, trigger. Shut up. Shut the fuck up. Because the reality is that trigger warnings are not required if you're just mentioning things. If I mention that I've had 4 miscarriages, which I have, that is not something that needs a trigger warning unless I'm going into detail. A small fact about my life and saying that I've had 4 miscarriages is not something that needs to be trigger warning about. Like, it's not something that I need to trigger warn people about. If I say I'm a survivor of captivity, abuse, DV, and SA, then that is not a content noted thing because I'm not going into any detail. Literally, to content note or to trigger warn people, you have to actively disclose the topic that you're going to be talking about. So if, for example, I wanted to talk specifically about the grief of miscarriage, and I wanted to talk about that, I wanted to talk about those feelings, then I could content note that and go, hey, this is what we're discussing. This is a sensitive topic. I know this might be something that some people don't want to listen to. Go ahead and scroll on if that's not your thing, right? Content noting that, totally okay, absolutely understandable. If you wanted to mention something that you think might be triggering to people, hey, you could say, hey, content note mentions of volatile subject. But here's the thing, even if you put mentions of, you have to explicitly state what you're mentioning, which you're gonna do anyways in the video. So if you're not going into detail, and especially if you're talking with a friend, like, if this person is your friend, and I go, hey, let's say you and I were talking on the phone, and I go, hey, yeah, I was just thinking about the fact that, you know, I escaped DV and it's been really, you know, just kind of hitting me hard. Now, you could be like, wow, okay. Now, let's say you were somebody who was in a situation where you couldn't listen to that topic, right? You don't need to scream at me about trigger warnings because I haven't said anything yet. You could say, hey, you know, that is a really hard subject. It's one that's I'm a little too raw about right now for my own reasons. And I know that I care about you, but it's something I can't talk about right now. Like, that would be a reasonable flip around and say, hey, this is a limit for me. I can't talk about that right now if that's what a subject you wanted to go further into. That's relationally, like not on videos, but relationally, we could have that conversation, right? Because the reality is that we could have a discussion and you could set a boundary instead of just going, oh my God, trigger warning. You should have trigger warned. What? No. Because if you trigger warned, if you go, listen, hey, I want to talk to you and content note trigger warning, I'm going to mention the fact that I'm a abuse survivor. What? Because you don't, it's just a mention. If you're not talking about the details of it, if you're not going into the deep aspects of it, content noting is giving you the exact same information as mentioning it in the moment. So if you're not going further, the person has time to actively respond and set a boundary. But all too often they just want to go into this bullshit and be like, oh my god, no, I shouldn't hear anything about that. La 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 la. I don't have to listen to anything that makes me uncomfortable or sad or unhappy, because all good vibes, all good vibes, all good vibes. Like, it's this idea that they never have to be uncomfortable. They never have to hear that other people have had bad things happen to them. They never have to have any discomfort whatsoever. And it pisses me the fuck off. Because I live in a body that has had all of these things happen to me, and even telling people the things that have formed my existence is something that, oh, you trigger warning. No, I'm not going to trigger warn you about my existence. I will edit the things that I think might actively be harmful to other people, and God knows, do I have to. But the reality is, me sharing general information about my life should not be a fucking trigger warning. Like, that is not a reality. Me stating something like, I'm a military veteran, I don't need to trigger warn that shit. Me stating that I'm a survivor of DV, I don't need to trigger warn that shit, because that's bullshit that anybody thinks that my life needs to be put under a trigger warning for existing. Or me saying I am polyamorous or bisexual, or that the fact that, you know, any of the shit that is about me, unless I am going into detail or explicit information about it or some emotional processing of it, there is no fucking reason that I need to censor myself about the reality that I have experienced these things. The idea that people think that they can use trigger warnings as a means of shutting down this kind of conversation because they're uncomfortable is part of the fucking problem. They're part of the problem. And it is a massive issue.